Lesson 47 is about percents less than or greater than 100. Now we know percents are just something out of 100, so that's going to help us as we go through this lesson. The first question says, 20% of what number is 15? We need to work the problem and then draw a diagram of the problem. So 20% of what number is 15? So we can write that as 20%. We know of means to multiply, so times Wn equals 15. Now when we have this problem, we have to look over at the 20%. When we look at the 20%, we can write that as 20 out of 100, because percents are always out of 100, times Wn is equal to 15. So if we want to figure out the answer, well, let's make it a little bit simpler. Let's say 20%, well, that's 2/10, which is the same thing as 1/5. So we're going to have 1/5 times Wn equals 15. To find Wn, we need to undo the multiplication of 1/5. So we're going to multiply by the reciprocal. We're going to multiply by 5 over 1. We're going to multiply both sides by 5 over 1. 15 is the same thing as 15 over 1. This works because the 5's cancel, the 1's cancel. We're left with Wn by itself is going to be equal to all this. Let's go ahead and simplify. 15 times 5. 15 times 5. 5 times 5 is 25. We carry our 2. 5 times 1 is 5. Plus 2 more is 7. We get 75. So we get Wn. Wn is equal to 75. So 20% of 75 is 15. We've got our final answer. Now the second part of the question said draw a diagram of the problem. So I'm going to erase our work on the side, and we're going to draw a diagram. Now when we draw a diagram of this, we're going to have, and it helps to make two circles. We've got one oval, we'll call them an oval, it's definitely more of an oval, and two ovals. The first one needs to be out of the 100%, out of the whole. So the whole in this part, 20% of some number is 15. The whole must be what number? Because we're taking 20% of that. So the first one is the 75. That's our whole. That's 100%. Now the second piece of our diagram is going to be broken into two parts. We've got 20%. We know 20% of 75 is 15. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to write that in here. 20% is 15. And the is and 15 look similar there, but that says 20% is 15. And then we know 80% is the rest. 80% is, well, we've got 75 minus 15. That must be 60. And we figured out how to draw our diagram box. This is our before, and this is our after. Now for your after, you can say 20% is 15, or you could say 15 is 20%. You could say 80% is 60, or you could say 60 is 80%. Either way is fine. Drawing these diagram boxes is important so we can recognize what's our whole and what our parts are. Let's look at our next example. Alright, we'll go back to a little bit bigger pen. We have what percent of 140 is 98? So WP, what percent, times 140 equals 98. Now we've got to remember we're working with what percent. So we're going to have to change it into a percent in the end. In order to figure this out, well, we want WP by itself, so we're going to divide both sides by 140. (98) over 140 is going to tell us what our answer is. So WP is equal to 98 over 140. We can cut both of those numbers in half. Half of 98, that's 49. Half of 140, that's 70. And nicely enough, both of these numbers are divisible by 7. 49 divided by 7 is 7. 70 divided by 7 is 10, so we get 7/10. So, what percent of 140 is 98? 7/10, that's 70%. So WP is equal to 70%. And we've got our answer. Now this question, like the last one, says work the problem and then draw a diagram of the problem. So our whole, and we're going to make our ovals bigger. Our whole, our 100%, what we start with. Well, the whole, what percent of 140 is 98? Well, our 140 must be the whole, because that's what we start with. Then our after, or our parts, and we can always break our parts like this. Well, we know that what percent of 140 is 98? We know 70% of 140 is 98. So we could say 98 is 70%. And then we have something is 30% to make up our whole of 100%. To figure out what belongs here, that would be 98 taken away from 140. That must be 42. And we've drawn a diagram box. This one's labeled before, and this one's labeled after. Let's move on to our next question. Alright, this is our last example for this lesson today, and we have, what number is 160% of 60? So, Wn equals 160% of 60. We need to change our percent into a fraction or a decimal. So we know 160%, that's 160 out of 100, which must be equal to 16 over 10, which must be equal to 8 over 5. And we want to use a small number here if possible, but sometimes using the number out of 10 is actually the easiest. Let's use the number out of 10 this time. So we're going to get Wn is equal to 16/10 times 60 over 1. Because we know 60 is the same thing as 60 over 1. The reason why it's easier to use 10 here is because we know straight away that 10 is going to go into 60 6 times. We can simplify before we multiply. This is going to become a 6. This is going to become a 1. So we now have 16 times 6. 6 times 6 is 36. Let's carry the 3. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 3 more is 9. We get 96. So Wn is equal to 96. So 96 is 160% of 60. That should make sense because 160% of 60 is some number bigger than 60 because we have more than 100%. Now to draw our diagrams, we've got one big oval, another big oval. Make sure to make those ovals big on your assignments so that it's easy to read them. So we know the whole here. Well, something is 100%. When we look at this one, well, what is 100%? We don't have 100%. We have 160%. So if we look at this problem, it's slightly different. This one is going to be out of 60. This is our before. And it's of 60 because we multiplied by 60. Now, we don't have smaller pieces of 60 in this problem. We have bigger pieces. So we're going to need to have a bigger diagram box. And that bigger diagram box we can shape like a peanut. We shape that bigger diagram box kind of like a peanut. You can see we're going to have more than 60. And that makes sense. Because in this problem, we know 96 is 160%. Because it's bigger than our original. So this is our after diagram box this time. This one's slightly different because we worked with a percent greater than 100. Lesson practice, we'll continue this more on page 190. Make sure you've got your notes completed. If you've got any questions, please write them down. And I'll see you during our next class.